The sparrow had reached the edge of the branch. I could feel it in my throat, the beat of wings, the tremble before the leap. My voice lifted with it, rising as if I might carry the bird into the air myself. The kitchen seemed to fall away, just for a second. It was just me and the story. Then I heard it, a sharp clatter. Hallie's spoon hit the tray. Her little shoulders jumped. She didn't cry, but her eyes went wide, and her mouth fell open in surprise. My words faltered in mid-air. Looked at her, really looked. The sunlight painted her high chair in gold, turning her curls almost honey-colored. A breeze drifted in from the cracked window, carrying the warm scent of toast and something sweeter. Tulips, maybe. And still, she stared at me like I'd turned into something loud and strange. I didn't mean... I started, but I didn't finish. Instead, I closed the book slowly, my fingers tracing the edge of the page. My throat was tight, and something in my chest twisted hard. I hadn't meant to scare her. I'd only meant to fly again. I didn't look up when Daniel spoke. She doesn't need all that noise. His voice was flat. No raised pitch, no bark. But it hit harder than if he'd shouted. Just a statement, clean, final. He didn't even glance at me, just kept eating like nothing had shifted in the room. The fork in his hand scraped gently against his plate. Behind it, the soft tick-tick-tick of the wall clock kept time, steady and judgmental. The kitchen smelled like oatmeal and quiet disapproval. I felt the heat crawl up the side of my neck. I wanted to say something. I almost said something, but the words stuck in my throat. Not because I was afraid, because I was tired. Tired of being too much in rooms that never made space for me. I bit my tongue so hard it pulsed. Not from fear. From an old habit. A reflex I'd learned in rooms where silence kept me safe, where soft voices earned longer visits and less suspicion. My hands, resting under the table, trembled. I pressed them flat against my knees. I stared down at the napkin on my lap. White cotton. Folded neatly. I counted the creases. 1, 2, 3. And then, there it was. The memory, sudden and sharp. The prison chapel, the plastic chairs, the echo of my own voice bouncing off the high ceilings. The first time I read my story out loud to the others. I hadn't read for applause. I'd read because it made me feel like I was still inside my body. I let the silence thicken in the kitchen. It was safer than saying something that might split the morning open. Hallie hadn't moved much. Her hands were still sticky with jelly, but her lip had started to tremble. She wasn't crying, but she was close. Her eyes lifted to mine, big and searching. I didn't know what she saw. A stranger? A storm? I dropped a whisper. "It's okay, baby." I reached for her spoon. She let it go without fuss, just laid it in my palm like she was handing over her trust. That tiny moment hit me harder than if she'd burst into tears. Outside, a robin chirped once and flew from the feeder. Hallie's sippy cup dripped slowly onto the tray. The kitchen felt suddenly too full, and at the same time, too hollow. The book I'd written was still open on the counter. Its pages curled slightly from the sun coming through the window. I couldn't bring myself to close it. That story had been born inside cement walls, in a place where voices echoed louder than hope. Where you had to speak with your whole chest just to be heard over despair. That story saved me once, but now, looking at the final paragraph, I wondered if my sparrow had done more damage than good. If my loud, soaring ending had startled the very thing I was trying to protect. The fridge hummed behind me, a soft, steady sound in the growing quiet. I turned toward the butter knife on the table. The morning light caught its edge, just enough to glint, and suddenly I could see it again. The yard, the Tuesday readings, women sitting on steps, on milk crates, on the edges of beds. Their eyes fixed on me, not because I was perfect, but because I made them feel possible. Even the hardest women snapped their fingers when I reached the last line. Some nodded, quiet but fierce. Some clapped. Once, I saw a woman cry behind her book. That voice, the one I used in the kitchen today, it had healed, but now, with Hallie startled and Daniel cold and Sarah always looking away, I wasn't sure anymore. Maybe healing makes noise before it soothes. I wiped Hallie's fingers with a warm cloth, gently dabbing the jam from between her knuckles. She sat quiet, watching me with those deep eyes. Once upon a time, I whispered, there was a little sparrow. Her body relaxed. She leaned against the cushion. Her hand tugged lightly at my sleeve. I finished the story, but this time, only for her. Not big, not loud, just mine and hers. Her smile came back like sunrise, slow and sure. She hummed softly, kicking her feet under the tray, and I made a promise, right there beside the high chair. I wouldn't stop reading. But next time, I'd listen while I spoke. The bulb above my bunk buzzed like a tired fly, flickering just enough to cast uneven shadows across the wall. It was late, long after count, and most of the women had sunk into the heavy silence that came with exhaustion and memory. But I was awake. That was when I wrote. My pencil scratched across stolen paper like it was digging for air. The paper had come from a forgotten clipboard in the laundry. The pencil was no longer than my finger. Still, I held it like a lifeline. Didn't write for beauty. I wrote to breathe. Each sentence was a breath I refused to let this place steal. The stories poured out shaky but certain. I bent low over the mattress, heart racing with each line, as if the words might lift me out of cell 3D. Outside, footsteps echoed once and disappeared. Inside, I wrote. Carla never interrupted me when I read. She just leaned back on her cot, head tilted, eyes squinted, like she was measuring the weight of every word. You've got thunder in you, she said once, real quiet. I looked up, startled. Thunder? She nodded, folding her arms behind her head. That voice? That's not noise, that's thunder. The good kind, the kind you feel in your chest before the rain comes to clean the world. Her cot creaked as she shifted. No one had ever called my voice anything but loud before. Too loud, always too much. But not Carla. She listened like the words weren't just mine, like they were hers too. The cell was dim, the air smelled faintly of potatoes from dinner, but that moment glowed. I didn't realize how badly I needed someone to believe my voice was worth hearing. She did. Tuesdays were the one day the ache in my chest softened. After chow, we'd gather by the vending machines near the far wall. There weren't many of us, 5, sometimes 6. No chairs, just backs against cinder block and knees pulled to our chests. That was our circle. I'd bring my folded notebook and read the latest story, maybe about a clever fox who tricked a mean guard or a girl with matchsticks who burned down. Fear. Stories that had nothing and everything to do with our lives. The fluorescent lights buzzed above us. The vending machine hummed like it had a secret. The floor smelled faintly of mop water and too many shoes. But when I read, the room changed. Eyes softened, shoulders loosened. Once, a woman who hadn't smiled in 6 months let out a laugh. Another clutched the collar of her jumpsuit and whispered, "You made me forget the walls." That stuck with me. I wasn't just telling stories to survive anymore. I was telling them to remind us all that we were still here, still human, still whole, somewhere under the gray. It was late, still night, quiet and low. I sat cross-legged on my bunk, the notebook open on my lap, the sparrow story finally finished. I copied it again, slow, word by word, this time neat, no mistakes, just care, just hope. The edges of the paper were soft from handling, but I folded it carefully like something sacred. Then I flipped it over and drew stars, crooked little ones, 5-pointed and childlike. I didn't know why. I think I just needed to send light with it. My hands shook as I sealed the envelope. I held it for a long time before letting go. "Sarah," I whispered, like her name might help it get there faster. Maybe she'd still recognize my writing. Maybe she'd still care. Or maybe not. But I had to try. The barred window leaked moonlight onto the floor. I placed the envelope on the desk and hoped. He barely looked at it. The guard, just held out his hand, flipped it once for contraband, then walked away like it was a bill or a form. But to me, that envelope held everything. My voice, my regret, my apology, my love. I watched him head down the hallway with it, my chest tight like I'd just run a mile. My breath stayed caught somewhere between ribs and prayer. Not for forgiveness, not even for a reply. Just to be remembered, to be heard, even once, beyond these walls. The air was cool out there. A draft slipped under the metal door. Boots echoed against the concrete. I closed my eyes and waited. I didn't have visitors, or routines, or religion to lean on, but I had my words. They were my chapel, my blanket, my way to scratch windows into a world that had none. Even when I had nothing, I was building something. Even now, all these years later, when I hear paper rustle or catch the scent of fresh ink, I remember what it felt like to write myself free. The screen door didn't creak. It groaned, then snapped shut with a sharp clap behind him. It wasn't an accident. It was punctuation. Daniel didn't have to say a word. The slam echoed through the house, louder than a shout would have been. I stood frozen in the nursery doorway, one hand still resting lightly on the doorframe. The baby monitor crackled behind me, white noise wrapped in lavender oil and tension. The air was still, but something inside me shifted. It wasn't fear. It was something colder than that. A hollowness, the kind that takes your breath not because someone raised their voice, but because you realize they don't think you're worth the sound. The sky outside was turning lavender, soft dusk falling over the yard. But in that hallway, I felt like the light had left already. He didn't come back. He didn't check if Hallie was still eating. He just left the silence behind him and the weight of everything he couldn't say. I turned slowly. Sarah was at the changing table, pretending to fold a burp cloth that was already folded. Her hands moved like she needed them to be busy. "You never told him?" I asked, softer than I meant to. My voice barely made it past the hallway. She didn't look at me, just kept smoothing that cloth with her thumb. Her shoulders sagged before. Her mouth moved. Guilt settled into the way she clutched the edge of the table, like it was the only thing keeping her from floating up and away. "I didn't know how," she said. Eyes locked on nothing. The lullaby from Hallie's mobile played faintly in the background, twinkly, out of place, like a child's toy dropped into grown-up grief. I stood there, waiting for her to meet my eyes. But she never did. "He thinks you taught creative writing," she said, almost as a question. At some shelter." I blinked once, slowly. Creative writing at a shelter. I should have laughed. That would have been easier. But I didn't. I nodded, because that's what women do when the truth becomes too heavy for someone else's life. We make it smaller. We wrap it in nicer language, easier shapes. She hadn't told him I was in prison. She gave him a version he could sit with over dinner, a version without bars or echoing corridors or shame. And I realized it then. She hadn't. Just protected him from my past. She'd protected her place in his world. I thought back to all the times she stood by him. The way she explained his silences like they were sacred. How she always rushed to translate him before anyone else had the chance to judge. He liked order. He liked schedules. Quiet dinners, soft music, no surprises. He liked bedtime early, flavors. Mild, stories short, and suddenly it hit me. He'd built a life where someone like me couldn't fit. And Sarah? Maybe she'd clipped parts of herself just to stay in it. Not because she was weak, but because she thought shrinking was the cost of peace. I looked at the baby shoes lined neatly by the door and listened to Daniel's pacing footsteps out on the patio. She had married a man who loved soft lies, and now the truth sat between them, loud and unwelcome. I wanted to be angry. I really did. But standing there in that dim hallway, I saw something I hadn't expected. I didn't see the grown woman who'd kept my story quiet. I saw the girl who used to draw little hearts in the margins of her letters when I was inside. The girl who never forgot my birthday, even when she was too young to spell all the words right. I saw fear. Not fear of me, but fear of what the truth might cost her. Fear of undoing the fragile calm she'd worked so hard to build. And I knew that fear. I had lived inside it for years, behind steel doors. And again, in rooms where I had to make my voice small just to be let in. This wasn't betrayal. This was survival. I sat on the edge of the couch, the copy of The Sparrow's Choice still in my lap. My hands trembled, not because I was ashamed, but because I remembered how far I'd come just to speak this story out loud. That story wasn't polished, wasn't soft, but it was mine. I wasn't sorry for where I'd been. I wasn't ashamed of the ink-stained nights, or the stolen paper, or the women who clapped for me under prison skylights. The only thing I was sorry for was how my truth still rattled the people who'd never had to earn theirs. I ran my hand gently over the book's cover. Outside, Daniel's footsteps crunched once more, then stopped, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't flinch. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It came through the hallway like a whisper, carried on carpet fibers meant for someone else, but I heard every word. "She's too much," he said. A pause. "Hallie jumps when she walks in." I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. I just stood behind the cracked door, heart thudding like footsteps I wasn't allowed to take. Each word landed like a pebble dropped into a shallow chest. Not loud enough to echo, just deep enough to bruise. Too much. That's what he thought of me. Not once did he raise his voice, but somehow it was worse that way, like each word had been chosen, measured, and spoken with quiet finality. The hallway. Lamp behind me cast long shadows against the floral wallpaper. The baby monitor hummed softly on the shelf beside me, steady and oblivious. And there I was. A woman who had once fought to be heard, now shrinking beneath a whisper that made me feel disposable. I used to speak to women who sat on concrete floors with eyes that hadn't seen hope in years. In Cell Block D, my voice was something they waited for. Tuesdays became sacred. They'd gather, some cross-legged, some slumped against metal lockers, some standing quietly in back. I read stories about girls who ran toward storms and sparrows who flew anyway. Carla always cried at the endings. And one woman once said I'd kept her from jumping off her bunk that night. She said it like a confession. I held it like a gift. My voice had done that. It mattered. So when Daniel called me too much, I didn't flinch from the sound. I flinched from ignorance. Because only someone who's never had to survive the silence would be afraid of what it takes to speak. I didn't go to him. Didn't say his name. Didn't ask why. I pressed my back against the wall like I might disappear into it, like the paint and paper might make room for me in a house that never really had. The floor creaked, once beneath my heel. No one turned. The hallway smelled faintly of fabric softener and old wood, like a memory that had been polished too many times to feel true anymore. I wasn't shocked. That was the worst part. I wasn't surprised at all. His words hadn't broken. Something. They'd confirmed it. Confirmed what I had buried under casseroles and quiet smiles and books I wasn't supposed to read aloud anymore. The house had gone quiet, the kind of quiet that only shows up after midnight, when even the walls seem tired. The fridge hummed softly. A nightlight glowed near the pantry, casting a small circle of warmth across the tiles. I stood by the sink, rinsing a mug I hadn't used, when I heard her small feet padding across the linoleum. Hallie. Peanut butter still smudged across her chin, one sock on, the other missing. Her curls were wild with sleep, her eyes soft and full of trust. She didn't say anything, just lifted her arms. Sticky little fingers reached for me like I was the only steady thing left in her world. I knelt down, scooping her up gently, her cheek resting against my shoulder. I could feel her breath, slow and sure, against my collarbone. In and her hug, I wasn't too much. I was just right. She was heavier than I remembered. Not by much, just the weight of time, of trust, of this moment I wasn't sure would come again. I settled into the armchair near the window, the soft blanket, pulling across both our legs. Hallie tucked her head beneath my chin, her hair warm with sleep and faintly sweet from her shampoo. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. I watched its headlights drift across the lawn, then vanish like a thought left unsaid. I knew Daniel didn't want me here much longer. I saw it in the way he left the room, in the way Sarah didn't stop him. I felt it in the missing books, the sudden quiet after I finished a story. But in that moment, with Hallie curled against me, I let it all pause. I held her like something borrowed, something precious, something I wouldn't be allowed to keep. The house had settled. Even the clock ticked slower, it seemed. I sat in the dim room, Hallie now asleep, her breath soft and steady beside me. The baby monitor buzzed gently on the table, just static and breath, like a sigh that never ended. And for once, I didn't swallow the ache. I let it move, through me, slow and heavy, like wind pushing through tall grass. I didn't resist it, didn't rush to push it down. I didn't need to, because I finally understood I would always be too much for people who only knew how to carry the light version of a woman. But I wasn't made for weightless rooms. Was made to echo. It was just a soft ping, barely loud enough to stir the quiet, but in a week filled with sideways glances and too long silences, that tiny sound felt like someone knocking on a door I'd forgotten how to open. I was sitting on the back porch, wrapped in my lap blanket, watching the string lights sway in the breeze. The air was cool, the kind that makes your shoulders relax. Somewhere 2 houses down, a dog barked. Once, then silence. I picked up the phone without thinking. Thumb swiped. Before my mind caught up, and there it was. Carla D. My breath caught. That name hadn't passed through my mouth in years, but seeing it lit up across my screen, felt like someone had just whispered my name from 1,000 miles away, and I'd still heard it clear as day. The message was short. Still got that thunder voice? I stared at it. Not like it was a message, but a mirror. Thunder, she'd called it once. No noise. Not too much. Thunder, the kind you feel in your chest before the rain shows up and makes everything clean again. The screen glowed against my lap, lighting up the blanket that still held the warmth of the afternoon. The porch was quiet, except for the creak of wood and the rustle of something moving in the bushes. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone remembered me like that. Loud, fearless, alive. That one sentence stirred something in me. Something I hadn't let breathe in a long, long while. Carla used to sit on the floor when all the chairs were taken, knees hugged to her chest, chin tilted just enough to catch my voice. Every Tuesday night after chow, I'd read. Sometimes, fairy tales I rewrote in my own words. Sometimes stories from scratch, ones that felt like dreams I never got to live. And Carla? She listened like time had stopped, said my stories made things softer, said the air felt different when I spoke. Once she told me, "When you read, I forget what I'm wearing. I forget the walls. I forget we're not free. I remember her laugh, sharp and beautiful, with edges like it had been broken once, but never quite dull again. And I remember thinking, she sees me, not as the woman who wore orange, not as a mother who made mistakes, but as a storyteller. That porch breeze brushed my cheek, light as a memory, and I found myself aching for that feeling again, to be seen like that. I scrolled up. There it was, The Sparrow's Choice, plain as anything, posted to a community story page. And below it, I saw the name, Sarah Ann Morales. My daughter. My breath caught in my throat like I'd swallowed too fast. She never told me, no text, no call, no, "Hey Mom, I'm proud of you." But there it was, out in the world, not hidden. Maybe. She hadn't shared it with Daniel, or to prove anything. Maybe, just maybe, she believed in it. In me. The wind picked up gently, rustling the bushes along the fence. A wind chime clinked once, soft and accidental. I stared at her name again, and my chest rose just a little higher. I didn't even notice when I stopped wearing my bright scarves, the orange one with the peacock print, the blue one with gold threads stitched into the corners. I used to wear them like flags, loud and proud, but somewhere along the way, I folded them up and left them behind. Traded color. For comfort, voice for quiet. Shame doesn't shout, not always. Sometimes it just whispers things like, not now, not here, not again. Carla's message pulled that whisper into the light, reminded me that my colors weren't gone, just sleeping, waiting. I pulled my lap blanket tighter, the sky now navy black. Fireflies blinked along the yard's edge like punctuation marks in a story I hadn't finished telling. It wasn't a big smile, didn't stretch wide, didn't show teeth, just a slow lift at the corners of my mouth, like a breath remembering its shape. I hadn't felt it in days, maybe weeks. But there it was. Rising soft and sure, the kind of smile that comes when something clicks inside you, not a fix, just a memory of how you used to feel when you were sure of who you were. Carla remembered me, and for the first time in a long while, I was starting to remember myself. The phone screen faded to black in my palm. Crickets started their slow chorus, and I sat in the dark, alone, but not empty. The garden had no rules, no rows, no plan, just life pushing through where it could. Sunflowers, taller than the fence, bending like they were nodding at the clouds, mint spilling over the bricks, bees circling in lazy loops like old friends who knew they didn't need to rush. There was a time I trimmed everything, controlled it, made it. Neat, but not now. Now I let it all bloom wild. There was peace in the mess. In the way rosemary reached past its pot, in the way lemon balm climbed the trellis like it had somewhere to go. The soil smelled rich, alive, like something always about to begin. I stood barefoot near the edge, dirt soft beneath my heels, letting the breeze carry the scent through the open window behind me. I no longer worried about keeping it small, and for the first time in a long while, that included myself. Sarah hadn't called, not in weeks, not in months. At first, I counted. Days, then Sundays, then birthdays missed by just enough hours to feel like they weren't accidents. Eventually, I stopped expecting, started planting instead, little pots of basil, thyme, lavender. I watered them gently, with the same hope I used to pour into voicemail greetings. Some things don't grow on your timeline. They root when they're ready. Her baby pictures still sat on the windowsill. Dust gathered in the corners of the frames. I never moved them. I didn't need reminders. I had roots of my own now. It was peach-colored, tucked between a credit card ad and a cable bill, handwritten in neat looping letters. I almost missed it, my name on the front. I opened it slowly, careful with the paper. It read, "We saw your story on the community page. We'd love for you to read aloud for the children at the town hall." My heart did something strange, tight and fluttery. I placed the envelope on the counter, next to a chipped ceramic mug and the pile of things I meant to sort. For days I walked past it, made excuses. What if no one came? What if my voice cracked? What if I couldn't do it anymore? But every time I walked by that envelope, something in me tugged. Not loudly, not demandingly, just a whisper. Go anyway. It was the orange one. The scarf Carla used to call my fire ribbon. Bold, full of color, wild peacock eyes scattered across the silk. I hadn't touched it in years. I opened the closet slowly, fingers brushing over old cardigans and scarves I used to wear when I thought softness meant safety. The orange one was folded at the back. Waiting. I held it for a moment, then lifted it around my neck, tying it slowly. My fingers trembled just once, just enough to notice. Then they stilled. I looked in the mirror, not a guest in someone else's life, a woman reclaiming her seat. The town hall smelled like wood polish and sunlight. People filled the room quietly, folding chairs creaking. Beneath them, children shuffled on the floor with coloring books and juice boxes. Grown-ups leaned forward just a little too far, and I stood at the front, book in hand. I opened it. The room hushed. No one breathed too loud. No one rustled. I didn't ask for space. I took it. My voice filled the wooden beams and crept into corners. I read slowly, steadily, letting each line land like soft footsteps across old ground. Line by line, the sparrow found her wings again. A boy in the front mouthed the final sentence with me. A woman near the back wiped her cheek with her sleeve, and I felt something settle in my chest. Like all the scattered pieces of me had come home at once. Outside the library, the sky had gone golden. Birds darted across the branches, and the hum of children laughing floated from the steps. I stood still, one foot on the pavement, the other in the grass, feeling the moment stretch around me like warm earth. I thought of my garden, messy, alive, still blooming, and I realized I had become it. I wasn't too much anymore. It was enough, more than enough. My voice had ripened. Not quite. Not corrected. It had grown wild and wide and ready. The years, the silence, the shame. It had all fertilized something deeper. Something that could now stretch tall, like sunflowers leaning into the sky without apology. The chairs were folding. A low murmur of thank yous and zipped jackets floated toward the exit. The buzz that had filled the room just minutes ago now softened like steam fading from a cup. But she didn't move. She stood near the dais, back straight, fingers nervously, twisting her purse strap. Her eyes flicked around the room, but always landed back on me. There was something in her stillness that made me pause. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't fanfare. It was something quieter, heavier. She wasn't here for a signature or a photo. She was waiting for something else. And I felt it before I understood it. Whatever she needed, it lived in a place I hadn't reached for in a long time. She didn't step forward right away. She waited until the last of the folding chairs scraped across the floor. Then she moved closer, slow but certain. I was in county, she said. Barely above a whisper, her eyes didn't quite meet mine. But I saw them anyway, wide, rimmed with something fragile but unbroken. My breath caught. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to, because I knew what it meant. Those words, that tremble in her voice that never fell apart. She didn't give me her story. Just the outline. Just enough. And in that silence between us, I felt something rise in my chest. Recognition. Not of her name, but of her ache. She said she found it in the rec bin, folded, dog-eared, a little sticky in the corners, like a story. Passed from hand to hand, too meaningful to throw away, but too heavy to keep. The Sparrow's Choice. My story. She said someone must have left it, and she picked it up because the cover looked like hope. I pictured her then, in a cold gray Rex room, clutching pages that had once lived in my hands, reading them like a rope tossed down into whatever hole she was in. My heart cracked, because that meant my words had traveled without me, survived without applause, reached someone even when I wasn't there to speak to them aloud. All I ever wanted was for one story to make someone feel less alone. And here she was, living proof that a voice can land long after it's left your mouth. I didn't think so. I just opened my arms. She stepped into them without hesitation, like she'd been waiting for that embrace her whole life. Not awkward, not rehearsed, just full. Her shoulders were bony under her jacket, sharp in places, fragile in others, but she held herself like someone who knew what survival cost. I wrapped her close, not like she was a fan, like she was a sister, like I was holding my younger self, unfinished, tired, brave. She didn't speak. Neither did I. But something passed between us in that stillness. Something whole. Outside, someone coughed in the hallway and walked on. The world kept moving, but in that corner near the dais, I stood in one of the most sacred silences I've ever known. For years, I asked myself if it ever mattered. If reading stories under prison skylights changed anything. If writing by flashlight and whispering to the yard air was just a way to stay sane. And now, I had my answer. She was my answer. Stories don't disappear. They echo. They bounce through concrete in classrooms, through folding chairs, and years you thought were wasted. Didn't save her, but the story did. She disappeared into the parking lot as quietly as she had arrived. I stayed behind. Just me and the echo of a moment I wasn't ready to let go of. I thought of Hallie, her sticky hands, her bright eyes. Her questions always seemed just a little bigger than her age. Would she ever hear my words like that? Would she carry them past bedtime and into her own storms? I didn't know. But as I turned toward the door and the dusk settled fully around me, I hoped. There they were. I spotted them, just as I looked up between pages, tucked into the back row, near the window, where the light from the skylight softened everything like a dream. Sarah and Hallie. Sarah's eyes were rimmed red, her hair pulled back like she hadn't intended to stay long. She held her coat like she didn't know whether she was leaving or settling in. Hallie sat very still. She clutched a soft-bound copy of The Sparrow's Choice with both hands. It looked too big for her lap. Her small face tilted up toward the stage, eyes wide, lit by the pale, rainy light above. My throat tightened. I hadn't known they were coming. No call, no warning. And suddenly, every word I was about to read felt heavier, sharper. The room around them faded. Just for a moment, it was only the three of us, held in a space made of paper and quiet recognition. She didn't wave, didn't smile. But Sarah's eyes found mine, and they didn't look away. There was something in her expression. Not apology, not sorrow, just something unspoken, something that hovered like a breath before a confession. I kept reading. My voice stayed steady, even as my fingers trembled slightly on the edges of the page. She didn't move, but her gaze never dropped. And inside me, something shifted. For years, I had imagined this moment, wondered what she'd say, what I'd say. It never looked like this, but it always felt like this. Aching, hopeful, fragile. I turned the page with purpose. Every sentence landed with a kind of quiet weight. Not just because the room had grown still, but because I knew she was finally hearing the story. My daughter. I read the part about the sparrow pausing on the edge of the branch, wings shaking, heart loud in her chest, and choosing to fly anyway. Could see Sarah's lips part slightly. Her eyes didn't move from mine. She remembered, not just the words, but the feeling of them, the rhythm, the reason. And I felt something return to me, something that had lived in the space between us for too long, a truth only a mother and daughter could share without ever saying aloud. The applause faded slowly, not thunderous, but kind. Sarah stepped forward, holding Hallie's hand a little too tightly, like she was afraid she'd run. "She found your book at school," she said, her voice low. "Insisted it was your voice." I nodded. My throat was too tight for words. My hands, still holding the book, trembled softly. Sarah looked older than I remembered, not just in her face, but in the way she carried herself. In the weight behind her eyes, a tiredness that pride couldn't cover, but she was there. That was enough. For now. Hallie tilted her head, curls bouncing against her cheek. Her voice was bright, pure, unfiltered. "Were you in a castle?" I blinked. I felt a laugh rise and catch in the same breath. It meant something else. Tears that wanted to follow it. I crouched until my eyes met hers. "Something like that," I said softly. She grinned, like I'd just confirmed something wonderful, like I'd admitted to being a fairy tale, and maybe in a way I couldn't quite name. She was right. We didn't talk about the past. Not then. Sarah stood beside me. Hallie held my scarf, twirling the edge of it between her fingers like it was silk, spun from something magical. And I stood still, steady. I didn't fill the silence. Didn't explain. Didn't rush the moment. I just let it be. Let it flicker like a small flame between us. Warm, gentle, fragile. And for the first time in a long time, I believed maybe not everything had been lost. Some things had just been waiting. The crowd had mostly cleared. People shuffled off with their programs tucked under arms and wet umbrellas dripping near the exit. That's when I saw it. The silver minivan, parked across the lot, engine running. Headlights already on, though the sun hadn't fully set. The sky hung low and gray, thick with rain that hadn't yet arrived. Daniel. He sat stiff behind the wheel, hands tight on the steering wheel, face unreadable. Not angry, not cold, just closed. He didn't come inside, didn't wave. He wasn't there to celebrate. He was just there to witness. Like a man trying to understand a language he never planned to speak. The wind rustled through the sycamore trees. I pulled my scarf tighter around my shoulders and turned back toward the doors. He hadn't come to listen, and somehow I already knew that. The glass door swung open behind me, and before anyone could say a word, I saw her, those curls bouncing, sneakers smacking the pavement. "Grandma!" Her voice cut through the parking lot like bells, clearer than the wind, louder than anything Daniel could have said. She ran, arms wide, dress lifting slightly in the breeze. The scent of damp asphalt rose as her feet hit puddles that hadn't fully dried. She didn't wait to be called. She just knew. Daniel stayed in the driver's seat. He watched, that was all. No door opening. No window cracked. Just those headlights beaming into the dimming lot like they had something to prove. But Hallie? She kept running until she crashed into my legs and wrapped herself around me, and in that moment, she belonged entirely to the sound of her own joy. He didn't wave, didn't roll the window down, didn't make a show of anything, just stared for a second longer than felt comfortable, then put the van in drive. The tires crunched slowly over the gravel. No screech, no drama, just a gentle turn of the wheel, a blink of the signal, and the soft hum of distance growing. Leaves floated down from the tall oak above as the van turned the corner and vanished. And inside me, something let go. Not anger, not triumph. Just space. Space for breath, for possibility, for all the things that had been too quiet for too long. She stood beside me, hands folded tight across her chest, like armor she wasn't sure how to set down. "He doesn't understand," she said quietly. "Not an excuse, just a fact." Then softer, like it came from somewhere deeper than her voice. But I think I finally do. Her words cracked at the edges, not from weakness, but from the strain of holding back for too long. In that tiny break, I heard years of walking careful lines, of biting her tongue, of almost believing him. But not today. Today, she didn't chase him down. She stood with me. The garden gate creaked as I opened it. The scent of rosemary and damp soil met us like an old friend. A bee hovered low near the basil, then drifted off, without a sound, and for the first time, I saw her stay. Hallie darted ahead before I could warn her about the dirt. She wasn't worried. She ran straight for the sunflowers, her small hands brushing each stalk as she passed, fingers outstretched, like she was blessing them. "They're taller than me," she giggled, spinning in a slow circle. Her voice rang out into the sky, loud and unafraid. I watched from the stone path, the late sun breaking briefly through the clouds and warming my shoulders. My heart swelled. This soft wonder, this wild joy. That was what Daniel would never understand. That sometimes loud is beautiful, that sometimes unfiltered joy is the most sacred thing in the world, and that I didn't need anyone's permission to belong in it. We didn't talk much after that. Sarah and I just walked, our steps slow and easy through the rows of herbs and flowers. I didn't ask if she was staying, didn't ask what came next. Sometimes silence is more honest than anything words can offer. The breeze quieted. The garden glowed gold under a break in the clouds, and from a porch 2 houses down, a wind chime let out one soft note, just enough to mark the moment as sacred. The door hadn't even closed behind them when it happened. Hallie's little hand shot straight up, her whole body stretching with it. "That's my story, Grandma," she cried, voice clear as a bell and proud as a trumpet. The library fell still. Even the rustle of picture books paused for a beat. Sarah looked startled, eyes wide, mouth parted, but she didn't hush her. She just stood there, frozen in that golden light that poured through the tall windows, while her daughter claimed me out loud. And I stood still, heart thudding like a page waiting to be turned. My scarf shifted slightly as I exhaled. Recognition bloomed in the quiet. It was loud, pure, beautiful. Not my second chance, I realized. My arrival. The children turned first, chubby, fingers pointing, wide grins stretching, then the grown-ups, not with confusion, not with judgment, with knowing, with softness. A toddler clapped. One librarian beamed and gave me a little nod, like we were old friends sharing a secret. I braced for discomfort, but what came was welcome. Hallie tugged at my sleeve, eyes bright. "Read it again," she whispered, as if it were sacred, as if the story belonged to her now too, and in that moment, I knew. This wasn't a return. It was the beginning of something entirely new. I opened the book with both hands, the edge of my scarf catching on the armrest as I settled into the chair. I didn't lower my voice this time. I didn't tiptoe around the sparrow's fear or whisper through the storm. My voice rose, slow and steady, like spring air pressing warmth into cold stone. It filled the corners I used to avoid. It stretched up to the skylight and curled around the story rug where little legs shifted in anticipation. I read the lines as they were meant to be read, full, sure, unashamed. When I turned the page, the soft click echoed like applause. The hush wasn't afraid now. It was reverence. Hallie pressed her body close to mine, her head resting gently on my arm. Her breath was soft and steady, sweet with strawberry, yogurt and morning confidence. Her small fingers traced the little birds printed on my scarf. Each touch light, careful, certain. And as I read, I could feel it. She wasn't just hearing the words. She was listening. the kind of listening that sinks in, the kind that finds a place to stay. That kind of stillness only happens when a soul knows it's safe. And sitting there with her, I knew she was safe with me. And somehow, maybe for the first time in a long while, so was I. Sarah didn't speak. She didn't scroll her phone or check the time. She just watched, hands still, eyes locked on me from across the room. Her gaze was glassy, as if one blink might spill something. One hand rested lightly on the back of the nearest chair, like she needed something to keep her standing. She didn't say, "Thank you." She didn't need to. Her silence said more than words could have, and I sat in it, warm, seen, steady, because I'd waited years for that kind of quiet, the right kind. They didn't whisper my name with gossip anymore. They shouted it with joy. Story Grandma, not the loud one. Not the woman who had been away, not the guest who stayed too long, just Story Grandma. The one with the scarf and the voice and the sparrow who flew anyway. And maybe, just maybe, that's all I ever wanted. To be remembered for the right things, the brave things, the stories I didn't stop telling. The morning light stretched across my lap. Hallie's hand rested over mine. The book was still open, and so was I.